I'm seeing live on Facebook. Welcome everyone. I would love if anyone in the Zoom could put into chat me around how many people are on Facebook Live, just so I'm getting a sense of if we're growing and how I can shout those people out.
Sure.
Shout out to everybody on Facebook Live. It looks like we're recording the Zoom too. Am I good to go?
I think so. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone. And if you want to speak, just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Excellent. All right.
So Nigel, that means you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay,
just
good.
got that. Cool. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our training. My name is Nigel Tan. I'm the Director of Training for People's Action. People's Action is a national network of community groups like you all, CUFA, across the entire country when we're fighting for racial justice and gender justice, economic justice and environmental justice. And I'm really excited to be training with y'all tonight, and I appreciate you taking the time, because this is going to be a training that's about analysis. And by analysis, we mean how do we describe the things that are happening around us, and how do we communicate why and what we want to do about it. And analysis is really important because analysis informs action. So I'm really excited to be with y'all today. I'm going to be talking a little bit about myself and my background and what brought me here. And then I'm going to talk about sort of the first big part of the training is about racism and capitalism together. And then we'll probably take a break there, come back and talk about how racism, capitalism, and sexism all fit together. So the training is going to cover a lot of ground. The content I'm pulling on can be a lot longer. So this is meant to like plant a lot of seeds that we can come back to later. So I'd ask that if you hear anything you don't understand, like if you've got any sort of question, if you're on the Zoom, go ahead and put it into chat. And if we're on Facebook Live, we'll possibly figure out a way to get your questions from there to me so I can deal with them. But we really want to, if there's something you don't understand, I want to hear that so I can try to explain it and clarify to you, not in the spirit of perfection, but I want y'all to walk with me and I want to be patient with it. If there's something you disagree with, if there's something you hear me say that you don't think is right or don't think is true, I'd ask one that you have take a little bit of time to think about what could I have said that you would agree with. Like, let's try to find where the common ground is and let's go from there. But let me start here. So I didn't grow up in a household where politics and justice and organizing were important parts. When I grew up in a city called Valdosta, Georgia. Right now it's a small city on the Georgia-Florida line. And it was me and my two younger brothers, Demetrius and Malik, and my mom and dad. And all of our life revolved around schoolwork. Like my parents had the really particular challenge of raising 3 Black boys in this American society, albeit in the rural South also. And the way they answered that challenge was to make sure that we were like the smartest, most clean cut, and most like nice young Black boys that we could be. So going to school and getting good grades was almost all that we lived for in a lot of ways. And that came with some pluses and deltas. And it meant a lot of things. It meant there was a lot of responsibility, and it meant that since I was the oldest, I learned the lesson of what leadership meant and what was required and what it meant to care about people and protect people who you actually care about. And so I'm putting those words out there like accountability and responsibility, because those are values. Like those are values that we in this training and across the country actually share. And it's messed up that those values don't get distributed out into the world. And so part of our challenge is to build enough power to make that happen. So talking about things and having an understanding for why is going to inform what we do about it. And that's part of why it's so important. Even though I didn't really know about organizing growing up, and I didn't get a first organizing job until it was my mom. It was barely a job because it was my mom who decided to run for office in 2010. She ran for a state House of Representatives seat 176, and she asked me to be her campaign manager. And this was the summer before my senior year of college. So I had no experience running a campaign. She had no experience being a candidate, but we saw an opportunity and we wanted to try and do something. So I remember cutting lists. I remember doing trainings and knocking doors and liking how no 2 days were the same. And I liked how the work was about talking to people. And we lost that race pretty badly. And there's a whole side story about that. We did not win in 2010, but I learned a lot, and I learned enough to make me want to keep doing work like this. So I was on the Obama campaign in 2012 in Virginia. I was a regional field director in Hampton and Newport News. Then I did some work in Norfolk and Portsmouth and Chesapeake. And that was all about calling people to recruit them to come phone bank, and then developing them and investing in leaders who would then build their own teams around them. And it was great to be a part of a bigger project. Like, I could see and feel how my individual contribution was adding up towards the overall picture and goal of getting the state of Virginia to go for Obama in 2012. So when that happened, I felt a lot of pride, and I could also felt a little bit of sadness also, because I couldn't look my people in the eye, the people who I'd been spending all these months with doing phone banks and voter registration. I couldn't look them in the eye and tell them with sincerity that their life was going to get marginally better because of Obama winning again. And that wasn't their fault, and it wasn't his fault, but I had to sit with that tension of, like, what am I really fighting for? Do I want one candidate, or do I want a movement? Do I want a federal candidate, or do I want local down ballot candidates? So as I started to think about that work, I found this network. I found People's Action, and I started doing event planning, and then I did movement politics work and elections across the country in 2014 and 15. And now I'm the director of training. I'm running our training program. We started the year with the Deep Canvas training. We're going to finish the year with Strategy College training. We've done a bunch of different types of trainings all in between there. So I'm hoping y'all get the sense of, like, I've seen this work. It's been about 10 years of doing organizing work. In the last 5, I've been thinking specifically about training a lot and doing a lot of training. And so I hope y'all feel prepared enough to, for something you hear me say that you don't understand, you at least trust me enough that I'm leading you towards some common ground. So let's start to dig into a little bit more of the content we got. And I'm gonna share my screen. It's gonna be a quick PowerPoint that I'll hop on and off. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just wonder, I don't think everybody on the call knows everybody. So I wondered if we could do some introductions at some point.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and do that now. I'm wondering if people can, name, like, where you're from, like if people are spread out across your name, where you're from, and what gender pronouns you use. I'm Nigel, and I use he, him. And what's a good reflection question? I'm thinking about, like, when did you learn that you wanted to get involved in social justice or activism, or however you call it? But everyone has a different, like, story related to that. So if you've got something to tell us there, we would love to hear that. I think I'm gonna try to call on people. We'll start with Roger and then go to Deborah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I started back in the 80s, and I watched our communities and watched older people go with the flow. I mean, they had a lot of knowledge, but they were tired. And I watched people knock on their doors and take advantage of them. And I was a past police officer. So I seen that a lot. I even seen, when I went to church, the older people there, but they were following the pastor, and they had no questions, but they didn't know. They didn't really know. And I connected that with our communities. And when I was a police officer, I understood that we, as the minority, we didn't know city laws, we didn't know state laws, we didn't know government laws. So how do you fight when you don't know that?
Yeah.
And this, so I'm from Cincinnati, and I'm really about social justice. And I hear every day, you've paid your dues. I heard it today. But did you know this guy just passed and died? He died for our justice. He believed in justice.
Right.
And
I appreciate you, Roger. I'm sorry. I appreciate you coming in, and I love how you've evoked the Representative John L. Lewis, who just passed away. Was it yesterday even? Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks. Let's hear
And
from
paying your dues. Yeah, paying your dues. I'm gonna shut down, but I want to say this right here. I have a friend that lives in Memphis, and she always left with me about justice and don't forget the struggle. Don't forget the struggle. I hope everybody hear that, because that's so important. It's still a struggle for us to have our rights as human beings over those who we put in office. I'm through. I'm through.
And that's part of what brings us together today, is to think about, like, what is our contribution to that struggle gonna be, in a way, and how's the way that we move the path forward. Yeah, let's hear from Deborah, and then we'll go to Willie.
Okay, my name is Deborah Sims. I live in Cincinnati, born and raised, but some of my family came from Virginia. I remember my grandfather telling us he had to leave Virginia because they were going to hang him. So I guess I've been active since I was about 15. My brother went to the Port College, and he got tear gassed when they got ready to tell the people they had to leave. They tear gassed him, and he always had trouble with his eyes after that. But my family, we've always been active. So I guess I started when I was about 15 years old. I walked out of high school. We thought we were treated injustice, and I walked out. And I dared them to say I couldn't walk. And the teachers told me, get out. We stood out in front of the school, and we protested all that day. And so I guess I've been active since I was a teenager. But I've always felt that I don't like the idea of people being not treated fairly. I've always fought for that. Even when I was a child, I would question things, and my grandmother would look at me, and I would still question, why are people being treated like that? Why do I care this? Why are they calling me, when I was in elementary school, they would call us niggers. They would nigga. And I would just wonder why they would do that.
I love that questioning spirit you're alluding to, Deborah, because I think a lot of us are going to share that in common. The idea of, like, we see something and then we got some questions about why it's happening that way. And if you ask enough questions, you'll stop getting satisfied with the answers, because the people who got the real answers aren't giving them to you. So yeah, that's super real. Let's hear from Willie, and then we'll go to Irene. Oh, we can't hear you, Willie. Looks like Willie's muted. Let me see if I can. Still can't. How about we go to Irene, and then we come back to Willie. Irene's fire. You want to introduce yourself? Oh, I can't hear you either, Irene. It's not me, is it? Can other folks?
I can hear you.
Okay.
There you go. Is that better?
There she is.
Okay.
Let's go to Eileen. Yeah.
Hi. I think probably my first experiences were I'm from Cincinnati, and I'm also been involved with CUFA for a long time. My first experiences were around environmental injustice in our neighborhood, and both in our own backyard, but also it was affecting the whole neighborhood. And it was sewage issues, but it was also landfill issues, and what was happening and where they were dumping stuff. Just picking the community that's not going to speak up, or they thought they wouldn't. That changed though. That's CUFA. That's CUFA coming forward. So
Yeah.
I guess I'd say, you know, it's just the sense of like, hey, it's wrong. It's like people live here. These are real people. They're not stupid. You know,
Yeah.
we're not stupid. We know what we're experiencing. And
yeah. I wonder if, like, and part of the tension even with that is we wish it would be enough just to validate that people are valuable. Our communities don't deserve to get treated that way. And it's also true that like people are benefiting from it. So like that, like goodness is there, and we got to figure out like people aren't going to let go of what is giving them power and privilege and
absolutely.
So we got to build power to take it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love, Eileen, how you're bringing the environmental issue into because part of what we're going to talk about is how all these different issues that even are coming up in the introductions are all related to the same root causes. Yeah.
Oh, a whole lot.
I'm gonna move us on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eileen, for coming in. Let's hear from Mary and then go to Albert.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm Mary Metzmeyer. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I live in Westwood. But how I came to this work is at my first real job out of college, I worked at a social service agency, and I grew up in rural Kentucky. So Cincinnati is a big city to me, you know. And so I lived in Over the Rhine and worked in Over the Rhine. And Nigel, just so you know, Over the Rhine is a really gentrified neighborhood now. When I lived there, it was not, you know. And so at this social service agency, I got frustrated with the structure of the board and the executive director on top and the social workers who are delivering the services, and then the folks who were receiving the services weren't really consulted. And what I saw in my neighborhood was that the folks in my neighborhood actually knew best what they needed. But in social service agencies, it's that pyramid structure, and so it isn't as effective, right? And so I stumbled into organizing 20-something years ago, and I've been there ever since. So yeah.
I love, this is, I think, gonna be a theme. You said the social services weren't as effective within the pyramid structure. And I think part of what we're gonna deal with is thinking about effective at what? I don't know if social services are geared towards changing root causes in the way that I think our organizing, we want it to be.
Right.
That's not on accident either. Like that's part of the institution. And we're gonna talk a little bit about it. Yeah. Let's hear from Albert, and then we'll go to Clark.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I am Albert. Last name, of course, up north, they pronounce it as good, but it's actually good. I grew up in a little place, I'm sure you all have heard of Selma, Alabama. I grew up in a neighboring county, which is Wilcox County. And I got involved in the movement in 1965. I've been here in this city now about 55 years. So I'm going to stop there because I'm more interested in hearing what Nigel, what you have to say about the issues that we are dealing with on hand today. One other thing, I am self-employed, been self-employed since I was 25 years old. And I am in the electrical industry. So I'm going to end there, and I want to hear more from you, Nigel.
That's interesting. Thank you, Albert. Let's go Clark, and then we'll go back to Willie.
Clark Beck, grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I think maybe I was 12 when I experienced my first overt action. Some guys were riding in a car down the street. We were walking home from playing, and they were yelling racial slurs out of the car at us. So that was kind of interesting. But I want to add a couple other things. So one side of my family was from Alabama, came up north to find a better life and get jobs. And it just so happens, these are my grandparents, just so happens some of my grandparents' brothers and sisters were domestic workers. So I had the opportunity to ride to the house to pick them up. That was an interesting experience. My parents both used education to try to advance themselves. And of course, I have stories from my dad and my mom of more covert kind of actions that took place in their jobs. So, you know, these kind of things, I like to say that if you're a Black person in America, you have, what is it, post-traumatic stress syndrome, just from the
Yeah.
environment. And
Yep.
so that's part of my interest, and just to make things, try to make things more fair,
Yeah.
as easy or as hard as that might be. But I appreciate what you're doing here with this training.
Word.
Thank you.
I think that I thank you for being here, Clark, and that theme of like fairness and what fairness looks like across all society, what we're going to talk about a little bit. I forgot who I was going toward next. Back. Let's see if Willie is back. Can we get Willie on? Oh, he's still showing up. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, my name is Willie Hopkins, and I live in Cincinnati. I've been a member of CUFA about 3 years, and I've been a person that never, I always like the underdogs. You know, I was hired as a medical social worker at General Hospital, and back in them days, in the late 60s and early 70s, there was all kind of mess going on in the emergency unit that I didn't like. I didn't like the fact that somebody would call a lady up and she's 900 years old and they talk about, come, Emma, you know, and I didn't like that. Her name is Emma, you know, Miss Smith, you know, you respect her. So I made a lot of changes, and, you know, I used to fight by myself, but when you get people behind you, your fight gets easier. So when I joined CUFA, you know, my fights got easier. I didn't have to fight by myself. I had a whole group of people to fight with me. So
that's right.
why I'm here.
Thank you, Willie. And like part of that pivot point I talked about earlier is we want to pivot to getting more people behind us as CUFA, right? There are bigger things that we want to be winning, bigger campaigns. And so what Willie's talking about is right, and we want more, and we deserve more. Let's go to Allison and then Irene's fire. I can't tell if that's a different person, but let's go Allison.
It is. Irene is a different person.
Okay, cool.
I'll be quick. I'm Allison Acello. I am the staff organizer at CUFA. I go by she, her pronouns. I started my social justice activities. I think I went through a lot of different majors when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in college, and I could never actually figure out what made sense for me. And I kept being like, okay, that's great to identify problems, but that's not the solution. And that's what I just kind of kept coming back to. Like I tried I've always been to environmental issues and always had a lot of reverence for, like, you know, the rainforest and the indigenous cultures and how they work in symbiosis. And that was kind of what got me into environmental issues. But all of the environmental issues that I saw in college, I'm like, I don't really want to end up writing reports for why we can justify this pollution for the EPA. I want to stop the pollution from happening. Right. So I found a canvassing job, and the rest is sort of history.
Come in through canvassing. I hear that a lot. Yeah, definitely. Allison, welcome. Let's hear from Irene.
Yeah, I'm from Cincinnati, and I spent most of my time teaching, so I dealt with children and issues that they had. I was I was all around Cincinnati, but mainly in the inner city area, and at the time when I was teaching, I was wondering how they survived, them and their parents. Since I was like from a different part of Cincinnati, I hadn't seen what was going on in the inner city. So it was kind of a shock to me till I got used to it. But, you know, I've always wondered how they survive the things that go on around them, the environmental things that happen to them, and so forth.
Thank you, Irene, for coming on. I see a 973 number. Last digits are 1010. You want to come off and introduce yourself? Or is that someone who's already on the screen? seeing as they haven't come off mute, let's try this other number, 513. The last digits are 534.
So if you're on the phone, you might have to do a *6 to unmute yourself.
Well, we'll keep it moving. If people on the phone get a chance to come off, we would love for you to introduce. Anyone on screen who I missed? I think I got everyone. Okay. All right. So let me do. This is good. Like y'all, like the found. I hope y'all are feeling in the intros how there is like a varied degree. Like there's different issues that are bringing people here. Right, and that's a good thing. And we're going to talk about, and part of our challenge is talking about how and to what degree all those issues are connected. I'm just trying to get my screen share right. Okay. Can anyone come off of mute and read this Angela Davis quote? Anybody at all? Don't be shy, get your voice in the mix. Okay, Eileen?
Radical simply means grasping things at the root. Angela Davis.
Mm-hmm. And Eileen, what does that mean to you?
Go to the source of the problem. What's it really mean? You know, what's really happening? What's at the base of stuff?
And Angela Davis is someone who like knows a lot about roots and root causes. And I want to tell a quick anecdote. Has anyone had the experience of uprooting a tree? Like maybe you got a big oak tree in your backyard and you got 4 or 5 people with shovels who are going to uproot it. Has anyone tried that before?
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. I was on an 8th grade trip, volunteer trip up in Atlanta with my 8th grade class, and they sent the boys, like a set of the boys. It was around 10 of us. That was our project for the afternoon. We went to some service agency, and they had this tree in the back. They had already chopped it. It was just the trunk left. It was this big old oak tree. And the way we did it was we had to take shovels and dig like little holes around the outside of the trunk where the roots were. And as you get to roots, you got to use your shovel and chop it. And it's like 100-degree weather in Georgia. It's hot. We're all sweating. And after about 4 hours, the best we could do was get like a third of the tree dug out. Like 8 boys, 3 hours, hot sweat. We could only get maybe a third of that work done. Like grasping things at the roots is really, really hard work. I don't want us to take that for granted, and that's part of why it takes a long time for structural changes to happen. It also means that we want to have as many people with us as possible. If we had 20 boys instead of just 10, then we could have got a lot more work done. If 1 or 2 of us would have been of legal age to drive a pickup truck or drive a backhoe or something, some sort of tool, we could have gotten that job done a lot more quickly, right? That's exactly how power works in the social arena. The more power you have, the more quickly you can have more structural changes made across society. And so I want us to remember that Angela Davis quote, because this whole training is about how do we talk about things with a structural analysis. You're going to hear me use the word structural a lot, and this is what I mean by it, like being radical and getting at the root. When you change the root of something, you're changing how it is structured, and that's what we want to get at. So, I've talked about, I'm going to say again that the root causes, like we've talked about roots, we talked about how hard it is to get at them. The root causes for all of the issues that we care about and are fighting for are these 3: capitalism, structural sexism, and structural racism. Some combination of those 3 root causes are what is bringing on anything you can imagine. So you can imagine a neighborhood that doesn't have enough stop signs. So they're having too many kids and people getting hit by moving vehicles. So like that's an issue, that's a problem. The root causes of that issue have something to do with capitalism, they have something to do with structural racism, and they have something to do with structural sexism also. So if you want to get more stop signs into this neighborhood, you want to look at it in as comprehensive a way as possible. Because the more root causes you talk about, the more people who are impacted by those root causes you can get to join you and follow you. The same is true for the civil rights movement, for example. Like the issues that people were organizing on, they wanted the right to vote for Black people, for example, and they wanted to remove all the hindrances to voting for Black people. That didn't have to do with just racism. It was about racism. Yeah.
Do you need all three, or do you need one of those structures?
What do you mean by need?
To control that, to have the power, do you need just capitalism, or do you need structural racism?
The way people who have power now, the way they got it, is through a combination of all three of these. Yes. But if our role is not to redo what the people who have it in power have done to us, what we're trying to do is build power to remove them from power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I just don't know if my question was answered. All three of those, do that have to be a part of keeping the power? I mean, can I just have capitalism and then I can run things?
Oh, no.
Or do I need structural racism with it?
You need structural racism with it, absolutely, especially in this country.
And sexism also?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's what I need to know. You need all three of them then.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. And then the question is, to what extent is each one playing a role? Yep, that's a good question. Any other questions? Because this is real foundational to the rest of the content, seeing how these three are root causes to anything. Looked like someone was off mute, but I can't quite see who. I was at a training in Washington State last year, and I had this slide up, and someone in the crowd asked the question, well, what about organized religion and churches? We know that those entities have created a lot of harm and have been the site for a lot of injustice. And I said, that's not fair to just look at those institutions. Like the institutions of organized religion have a lot to do with capitalism. They also have a lot to do with sexism, and they have a lot to do with racism too. And when I answered the question in that way, the person saw where I'm coming from. So it's not about excluding, but it is about putting into a context. Looks like Eileen, are you?
Yeah, I'm wondering, what does social reproduction mean?
Yeah, this is a slide from our strategy college training that we do in conjunction with the Grassroots Policy Project. So I want to give them credit for creating this. And in that training, we do a whole 2-hour, it might be a 3-hour piece about structural sexism. And within that training, we talk about how structural sexism was meant to control the social reproduction, like who is doing the work of ensuring that society can reproduce. It's not just childbirth, it's not even just child care, but it's also like social management. And we talk about how that work has traditionally been put on people who are socialized into the female gender, and at the same time we have undervalued that work too. And that's how the structural sexism relates to capitalism. That's kind of jumping ahead, but that's a great question. Any other question? That's a good one. Let me bring my chat up just so okay, I got my chat up too. So if you want to put it in the chat, that's totally cool. So we got these 3 root causes here to anything that we're organizing for, anything we're building power towards. I'm gonna skip through this a little bit. This is a slide where we talk about the ways that power shows up in the in the public sphere or across society. There are different faces of power. The sources of power are organized money, organized people, and organized ideas. So if what we're trying to do is build more power to get more people to follow us, to get more people to follow where we're going towards restructuring how the society works, the way we do that is by organizing people, organizing money, and organizing ideas. And when you think about it, it almost always comes down to organizing people, because there is no money that isn't in the hands of people, and there are no ideas that are not in the heads of people. So the way power shows up falls into these different faces, but the sources of it are consistent. And the lesson I want people to take away from this is, for any issue you're organizing for, we can do the work and we can help you do the work to calculate exactly how much power you would need to build in order to see that issue win. Like, we can do that. In elections, it's a little bit easier because a certain number of people voting for you is going to win. But even with issue campaigns, like, we deserve to be super clear about how much power it's going to take to win the things that we want to win. So for instance, there are people who might be organizing to raise the taxes of rich people across this whole country. They want a federal law that raises the taxes on just rich people. If you wanted to pass that law, you need to have a lot of power, because there's going to be a lot of people against wanting to raise those taxes. But people, any questions about power and the sources of power and why power is important? Because you're going to hear me say the word power a good bit. We're going to need a lot of power to undo how these structures are on top of our society. So we've talked about classism, racism, and sexism, how they're all the root causes. But it gets really complicated when we look at all the different levels that can show up. So this is a pictogram, we say, that helps people understand and communicate on what level they are talking about. So there are components to this pictogram. Down at the bottom, that sort of grayish green rectangle represents history. So you could use this just for racism, for example. Maybe let's look at this picture just for structural racism. The history is the facts, like who did what to who when and on what dates, the history of what has happened to your particular racial group. My racial group is Black or African American, or like the descendants of enslaved Africans. And like the history of that racial group is one of exploitation and dehumanization. And so on top of that history, I'm now looking at the triangle. The blue triangle represents institutions. So on top of history, society has built institutions. And examples of institutions are the education system, or the policing system, or the military, or government. Like, those are big I institutions that govern our social lives. Another institution is the healthcare system. Another institution is corporations and Wall Street. Like, people who are trading money, but it's not real money. It's like stocks and stuff. Like, that's an institution. And institutions have like individual organizations within them. So within the institution of the healthcare system, there are doctors who go to school. There are insurance companies. In this country, there's insurance companies who are footing the bill, quote unquote. There's also the people who are building the infrastructure, like building the hospitals and running and driving the ambulances and stuff like that. All those are mechanisms within the institution. And the lesson here on institutions is that institutions serve a purpose, and that purpose is connected to their history. Right? So another great example of institutions is our educational system. That by a lot of metrics, the educational system in this country does not rank high with other education systems around the world in terms of performance. That's because our system of education is built on the history of needing to supply a workforce. Like y'all hear, like our education system was not built to feed people's curiosity or sharpen their critical thinking. Our education system was built to supply workers for factories. right? And so on top of that history, we get an institution that does a certain thing. Like when your institution is built with that goal in mind, it's gonna do that thing even when resources get limited. So when we then go to the disparities between people who are going to public schools versus private schools, we can see that it's not just a personal, or it's not just about the class and who can afford public versus private. It's also about public schools were built to do a thing, and they're still doing that thing. And that thing is not enough for what our people deserve, is what I feel like. And so as an example of an institution. So to recap a little bit, we've got history, and on top of history are institutions. All right. So let me go to, within institutions, you see the black stick figure. That represents interpersonal, like the type, and with this example, we're talking about race. We're talking about racism between people. That's what the black stick figure represents within the institution. So let's say I'm working at a job, and it's a minimum wage job, and I get fired because, in my words, the boss is racist. The boss doesn't like me because I'm black and he's white. That's an example of interpersonal racism. That boss had power over me and fired me. And it was racist insofar as I can tell of like what I'm picking up from our relationship, but it's happening within an institution. Within that institution of any business does not care about how it's treating its workers. The institution of business does not care about fairness and justice to me, its workers. The institution of business cares about profits, and anything that's going to maximize profits is what that business is going to do. So even though there was interpersonal racism there in that example, it's not going to get corrected within the institution because the institution is still surviving. Even without me, there's another person that they can bring in, and it keeps on churning. So we make that point because our society likes to focus on interpersonal racism. Our society likes to focus on individual people who create individual harm. And you could say that for like racism, you could say this for sexism and gender too. But the fact that we are focused so much on interpersonal and not understanding the whole pictogram that we're putting here, that tells me that there's something going on here. Like there's somebody benefiting from us, regular people, not understanding and seeing, not even understanding, because I think that we can feel this once we slow down. But the powers that be are invested in us not seeing this full picture. Because if we did, we would see more people who we could organize against them. So the focus on interpersonal is not healthy. It's not strategic. It is important, and that creates a lot of harm. But if we want to talk about building power, we want to have this whole picture in our minds and in our spirits. And that kind of gets to the red circle, represents cultural oppression. In this example, we're talking about racism. So that red circle represents white supremacy, like the cultural norms that dictate how society is governed. And by cultural norms, we're talking about the things that we presume to be true without even needing to talk about them or confirm them. And when we're talking about race, we're using the example of racism. That cultural norm is white supremacy, and it comes with a whole set of norms like avoiding conflict and being entitled to comfort. And those norms govern how people move through society. An example of this is the lack of vulnerability that we see in public spaces. Like human beings are emotional people. Like we are way more complicated than like norms will allow us to be. And that's because of the culture around us. We're like put into the system to play a specific role. So we've got history, and on top of history, we build institutions. And within institutions, there are people who are relating to each other on an individual way. And the red circle of culture engulfs that whole system, this whole structure. The last piece I want to talk about is the purplish weight in the middle of the stick figure. That represents internalized oppression. We're talking about racism for this example, so that weight represents internalized racism. And for me, for my racial group, I think that one thing that I've internalized is the anti-Blackness that comes with this history of exploitation and dehumanization. It makes me sad to think about how much work my mom in particular had to do to make sure me and my brothers understood that Black was beautiful and to be proud of being Black. There was a whole lot of extra work, like coloring the little faces in all our children's groups. My mom went through and colored all of those faces brown from white. Like, they're books, so they all got white people in them, but she went in and colored them for me and my brother so that we always saw and had that visual there. That has an internalized effect, like an effect that the person on an individual level feels within them. And that's a piece of this puzzle too. So as we flip back, I'm gonna flip back to here. We've talked about these root causes: capitalism, structural racism, and sexism. For each one of those three, you can apply that pictogram to yourself. You can look at that pictogram and look at what is the history of my class group, or you can look at that pictogram and parse out what is the history of my gender group to get at the sexism piece. And once you pull out each of those pieces, you can then communicate them. Like, that's when like analysis can move into action. We're talking about communicating. We want to like tell stories that reflect this level of nuance. Any questions about let me check time. So,
A lot of questions.
okay.
A lot of questions. I'm kind of afraid that I'm not going to understand that interpersonal deal. That I heard you say through that, you talking about money also. I see how that connects with issues with the schools and still health and what's most important. And it's going to end up being money, because the city, our county and our city can't survive not bringing in revenue.
That's right.
So that still kicks the human health system. It kicks us to the curb.
Well, that's like, to us is not everyone though, and that's part of how the roots all connect. If I'm understanding you right, like within the health system, you're right that, well, look at it this way, like there is enough money out there to make sure that everyone is taken care of. The people in power are making decisions about where it goes. And because of racism and because of sexism, they're making decisions that don't meet our community. Do you see that? Is this helping?
Yes, I see that.
Uh-huh. And so
people,
keep going.
I'm thinking, how can people rule out money is not going to be a part of this thing? I see that as people in power is concerned about the money more so than my life.
Yes, and that's a trap, right? Like that, it's messed up that that's happening. Like that is part of what they are saying, is their money and their privilege is more important than not just you, but all of us. And that's messed up, and we deserve to feel angry about that. You're right that we don't want to throw away money, and part of what we're trying to get at with this training is, when it comes to, we want to think about how much it's money and it's racism and it's sexism, and depending on the issue, how much is it? Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so I want to come back to crafting a story, because we'll do that activity at the end, I think. What I want to do is start talking about, like, it's one thing to just say that all those three root causes relate to each other and be like, yeah, I agree with that, and that makes sense. But in the world as it is, that's not the mainstream understanding of how these systems relate. Like, we have to organize. We're organizing our ideas against what people already believe, and I think that makes our job a little harder, and in some ways a little easier too, because the lines are already drawn. So I'm going to start to go through the mainstream ways that people understand. We're just going to talk about 2 of the 3 root causes. We're going to talk about capitalism and racism, and then we're going to put gender on top of it. So this is the screen I'm showing you right now is one way that the mainstream understands the relationship between capitalism and racism. And that is that capitalism creates racism. That because there are greedy people and there's a market-driven economy, racism got created to maximize the profits of white people. And so what people will argue is that if we got rid of capitalism, racism would fall automatically. That's what this first understanding is saying. If we got rid of capitalism, racism would fall automatically. To take it a step further, let's focus just on capitalism right now. Let's not talk about racism, because if we get rid of capitalism, we'll get rid of racism. That's what people who believe this slide want us to believe too. What do y'all think about that?
I don't believe that. I think racism is there no matter what capitalism.
That's right. Is that Irene talking?
No, this is Debbie.
Oh, this is Debbie. Got it. I had the wrong person over. Yeah, Debbie. Good. Yes, that is right. And you are right there. And I wonder if does anyone disagree with that in the spirit of like parsing out, being honest about where we stand. Because if everyone agrees, then I'll keep moving. And it's looking like people do agree with this. Good. Okay. So you say so this is false. We don't agree with we get rid of capitalism, we get rid of racism. And mind you, we're not even talking about sexism and gender yet. We're just talking about these 2. So a second understanding is that the 2 systems are totally separate. That capitalism is a thing and racism is also a thing, and you can choose which one you want to fight, but you have to choose. What do people think about this? What do people think about it, and have you seen people repeat this?
I see it all the time on political message boards and Facebook, and like I see it everywhere.
Yep.
But do we know what capitalism is?
Oh, that's a good point. I might have skipped that.
I mean, we talk about capitalism. I don't think we know what capitalism is.
Let me offer a quick definition just so we could be of one accord here. Capitalism is our current economic system that is based on rich people exploiting poor people. Capitalism is our current economic system that is based on rich people exploiting poor people. That's the definition.
Can I just say this? Capitalism to me is one thing. It's money. That's what we as the United States, we're built on money. And whoever has more money controls the power.
It's also true that the way you get that money, especially in this country, has always involved racism.
Okay.
People has always, and that goes back. That absolutely starts with the impact of slavery on our economy in this country. Like slavery is the thing that set up this country, and maybe I'll stop sharing here because this slide don't really relate to it. Slavery is the thing that set up this country to be as rich and powerful as it is today. There is nothing unique about this land that we're on, but that Europeans just got here and saw this, what they called untamed land that was open, despite the fact that there were people here. And they were able to bring in a free labor force to maximize profits. And it didn't just maximize profits for the plantation owners in the South. Those folks got rich. It also, a lot of those plantation owners had to take out loans from people who owned banks in the North. Those people got rich too. it also set up like all the cotton that was getting farmed by people around the South. A lot of that cotton was getting shipped back to the UK, and that helped them maximize their profits as well. And that's how they got known to be a group of people who dress well. Like they had a lot of the textile factories and were actually making clothes with the cotton that my people and your people were growing and picking. So everybody got rich except for us. And so like when you look at it, can't just be just get rich and you have power. Like the way you get rich is set up in racist terms. And don't forget, we haven't even talked about gender. Like in order to own land, to even be on the playing board of even potentially having a farm or plantation, you had to be a man. Like it is, so there is no way to get rich, especially in this country, without racial privilege and without gendered privilege. And across history, as time has added years upon years, those groups of people have stayed in power. It's not an accident that John L. Lewis like marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in the 60s, and then he did it again like years ago for the same issues. That's not a coincidence. So you're right. I like the clarity of which you're getting at, like who has power. And I think we deserve to enhance it and look at like how they got it, because that once we tell that complete story, and when complete story means it's not just class, it's race and sexism also. When we tell a complete story, I think we can get more people to join with us.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said it. You said it. Yeah.
I appreciate you asking, because it's a way that like this. Yeah, I appreciate you asking, and I'm gonna keep so a lot of people want to believe or understand that capitalism, racism are two totally separate things, and like this is just an all around like bad way to think about things. I like some methods have some benefit to them, but this is not one of them. There's no way that capitalism can be separated from racism at all. So a lot of people like to say that there's a little bit of overlap between capitalism and racism, a little bit of overlap. That a short term for this is intersectionality, that the two systems are different, but they intersect in some places. This is a good way to understand or enhance your understanding of specific individual stories. So if you think back to the pictogram, if you want to understand the experience of that stick figure, that person within the system, then this is a good one to do that, because individuals are going to feel different pieces at different times. But this is not a good structural analysis, because it's not just that they intersect. It's not a little bit of overlap. Based on the story I just told, it's like these are deeply connected. Like this is what we believe. Like racial capitalism means that the red circle, which is capitalism, and the yellow circle, which is racism, are so deeply intertwined that they're almost the same circle. Almost. And that's what we mean by racial capitalism. And that story about enslaved Africans coming here, maximizing profits for just about everyone involved except them, tells you that race and capitalism piece is central. And I hope y'all are seeing that. Like, it's not just true that the United States power and significance across the past like 500 years has to do with that, but also the power of all of those little European countries, France, Portugal, Spain. Those are all places who, before the transatlantic slave trade, were not rich countries. They were not rich areas. It was because of the free labor that our people provided that all of their wealth grew. Like the impact is that large, and like I want us to feel that scale. So racial capitalism is the understanding that we can't separate capitalism and structural racism, and that when we're looking at our issues, anything that we're organizing for, we want to have that frame in mind, particularly for our communication strategies and also for our base building strategies. We want to talk to people as if their individual action is not just dismantling racism and not just dismantling capitalism, but we're trying to get at both together. And that makes me feel good, right? That the problem is a lot bigger, but also so is the solution. So that's gonna There are some sections. There are some sections in that training about some kind of like story sharing that we could do. There's a way that we can spend a lot of time getting at like the personal impact of the structure of racial capitalism. I think for time, I think I want to not do that and make sure maybe we can have a little bit of a discussion about like some new idea that you heard that you like in that content, or a question you have, because we're gonna, after that, we're gonna move into talking about how gender and sexism plays on. So any questions or reactions to the racial capitalism content?
One quick one.
Yep.
I've heard it said in business circles that the biggest expense a business has is its labor.
That's right.
And if you have free labor,
that's right,
as you so aptly put, free labor for the southern states, borrowed money from the northern states, they're making a profit on that. Now they have money to loan to other people to start factories of whatever type. It is so crystal clear as you describe it, but most people don't understand that history. And the thing that comes to mind to me is, in recent times, we've been hearing a lot about this reparations. And so people will say, well, I never owned any slaves. Well, you're benefiting from the fact that there was slavery. Anyway, I'm going to shut up and let you continue.
That's a good, like, I like how it's coming to reparations, because I think as as a community of Black people, like the descendants of slaves, I find it like there's a way that we feel disconnected from this country. Like the 4th of July is a great example, I think. Like we enjoy the time off, but it's not. This isn't always a country that has been kind to us and one we want to celebrate. And I don't think that can change for Black people in particular until reparations happens. And even after that, it's not an automatic given, but just from the sheer economic numbers of what our ancestors' labor created, like you can't have a country where you feel a part of without that country taking responsibility and saying, like, in some ways, thank you, and I'm sorry. So I like how reparations has come up, and we can do a whole power analysis about how much power that would take. Like people have done the math on reparations. It's picture billions of dollars, and we print money in this country, so we could print up that money, but there's political things standing in the way there. And the OG made another point about, like, yeah, when a plantation owner starts to get rich off cotton or sugar or rice or whatever the thing is, like they also have money to help a politician get elected. Does that sound familiar? Like those same things are happening. Right? It's not an accident that those politicians in the South wrote laws like Jim Crow to keep my people chained even after enslavement. Like those people got in office in part because their cousins or goddaddies or granddaddies gave them money so that they could run. And let's not lose the gender lens too. I'm talking all about men and maleness here. And there's a degree to which structural sexism is a lot older than structural racism. That's what I'm about to get into now. Unless folks got other questions.
Nigel, just building off that point, can you talk a little bit about how, we just morphed after slavery, those institutions into different institutions to prevent people from being able to accumulate generational wealth?
Uh-huh. Well, it's like, I think I would actually say this, part of what, I would say that the institutions didn't necessarily change, but they like enacted things that still fit that purpose. So one of the great institutions for this is banks and redlining. Y'all know what redlining is?
Yeah.
Anybody? Yeah, I'm seeing lots of nods. So like that, the bank being able to, like, the institution of banking did not change in order for redlining to become a thing. Like nothing changed in the rule books around what a bank could and could not do after Jim Crow, for example. And yet the institution still found a way to serve its purpose, which in their mind was to maximize the profits they could get from white families by ensuring to those white families that they wouldn't be around Black people, right? And so, like, that morphing is real, and I think that the thing to track across history, like, the thing to know about institutions is to look at how they started. Like the institutions, how did the institution start? Like, what purpose did it try to meet? It probably still tries to meet that same purpose today, even though the context and the people have totally changed. And the way they meet that purpose is through like the laws and policies. Yeah. Okay, that's a good question, Allison. Let me, I'm gonna get back to the PowerPoint, and we're gonna talk about where we're gonna add on the lens of gender. And to do that, the first thing we want to do is try to distinguish, the difference between gender and sex. Gender is a felt aspect of who we are. And let me preface this by saying, like part of how the 1% keeps their power is convincing people in the 99% that they are different from each other, creating like seeds of division, mostly around racial lines, definitely along class lines, and to a degree around gender lines. So when people are separated, they're not coming together against their target. So the target benefits from the separation. The powers that be benefit from us not understanding the difference between gender and sex. So this isn't just like a theory that we pulled out. I want you to think about like the impact that this has on how you act and how your community acts, because ultimately that's what's keeping people in power still in power. So even if, yeah, I think that's enough. So gender is a felt aspect of who we are. That's what gender is. And not to say this, yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but you're getting ready to lose me. The target benefits sex.
No, I was saying the people in power.
Huh?
I'm saying that the people in power, people who have power, are benefiting in part from us not understanding what's really going on. And the difference between sex and gender, I'm saying, is what's really going on. So there's a reason why we don't get trained this in schools, for example. Like that institution is not set up to feed people's curiosity.
Everybody else understand that? Because I don't understand that. A gender is between, like, I always thought gender was like a male or female. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally good. No, it's not changing, but like try to distinguish that from like gender versus sex. So gender is the felt aspect of who we are, and sex is like the system of categorization. So man and woman is a way to categorize sex, and that gets categorized based on like biological sex, biological traits like sexual organs. Man, woman is sex. Male, female is gender. That's the distinguishing thing we want to make here.
But Americans are like confused about sex. I mean, you can't walk around with no clothes on, but in another country, they can. And we get all offended. We get all offended by sex. So that messes me up. I don't.
Well, how does it mess you up? Or what do you mean?
Well, when you start saying sex and gender, well, that's how I've been taught, that when you start talking about gender, you start talking about a male or a female. That's the definition, period. I know it's crazy now how they doing, because you asked us to identify our sex really when you first started. But I'm old school. Old school. Sex means a male or female.
Well, are you okay, Roger, with accepting that it might not be that simple?
Well, that's the world right now. It's that It's not that simple.
Quick,
'Cause
can you be, well, let me cut you off. Would you accept that the world has never been that simple? Just like I'm with you that that's what we get taught, but we get taught a lot of things that aren't actually right or what it has to be. And I'm positing that like this distinguishing between like sex and gender is one of those things. It's really important for how our economy is set up, that people feel really resolute and clear and almost strict about their identity. But I think if you thought about like how complicated it feels to be a human, you wouldn't be as committed to being that, like, why would you want to be that strict about something that everything about you is a little bit more fluid? Like, it doesn't have to be as strict as it's been taught to us. And actually the powers that be, they benefit from it being that strict because people don't, well, let me stop. Let me, you got a reaction there? Roger?
I think that's a brainwashing system of how they've done that. That's just like, and I apologize if I'm offending anybody. That's just like you go into church, Jesus is white. How can that be?
Right. I think the brainwashing is that we accept that sex and gender have to be that strict. I think that's the brainwashing.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Oh, okay. I thought you. Okay.
I agree.
Good.
It's a lot of brainwashing going on. It's a lot of brainwashing going on. The brainwashing, I'm going to shut up. The brainwashing is going to be with all of these protesters. They're going to find the true history of this country.
So somebody
I'm
else
through with that.
Yeah, can I throw something in? So as you're saying a lot of these words, I'm flipping through the dictionary just to make sure I have a good understanding. And I did that with capitalism. I just did it with gender. And you know, there's more than one definition in the dictionary for gender. And the second one in my dictionary is the one you're talking about. It is recognizing or associating with a group. And I think that's the key. It's a group. So anyway.
Well, that does and I like how you're naming group because it gets to the societal aspect. The gender roles of male and female are about how should people act in a society. It's not biological. It is about like, it's a way to group people, as you put it. That's one of it. Part of that grouping is what do people identify with? What do people get celebrated for? What do people get punished for? Those are the things that gender roles are setting us up to be in a very strict lane about. Oh, you're muted.
This is Debbie. Her, she. Isn't that a way that capitalists keep us off feelings?
Yes, you're jumping ahead, Debbie. You could train this soon. Yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely, and that's how you can start to like know and feel that something unnatural is going on here. There is nothing natural about the system of capitalism. Like it's built, like there's nothing natural about it. And so they had to build a bunch of unnatural things to make us fit into, be cogs in the machine to make it work. And the way they did that is through racism and through sexism.
So
let me, oh, go ahead, Roger. Or who is that talking? Go ahead.
It's Elder Donnell. Okay, you said, did someone say there's two types of gender, or it's more than two types? If one type of gender, say I'm filling out an application, and they ask me what are your gender? Well, of course, I'm gonna say I'm a male.
Yeah.
And I guess a woman would say they're a female.
Yeah.
Is that the first gender that we're talking about? Or
so in that example, when you're talking about, I'm sorry for flipping through the slides. I thought I had one that got at this. I'll just stop sharing so it's not confusion. So in that example, you're talking about filling out an application, Like that application is coming from an institution or like a business or organization, and that organization is in the mainstream. So they are not really understanding gender different from sex. The mainstream understanding is to put those together, and that's why it's just one question.
Okay.
The reality is it's not that simple.
Okay.
Any other questions or reactions? Because it'll help me like guide what I go to next.
So does that mean that, and I'm gonna use this term again, old school is gonna have to die off?
Why would it mean that?
Because that until that happens, I'm talking about old school die off, we will still be thinking about male and female. I heard Clark say he went through the dictionary where people don't do that. They just go along with going along with. If you follow me, it's like I'm in church, and I haven't read the Bible. I just go along with what the leaders say. So male and female. That's a male, that's a female. That ain't a he, him, her, or whatever. So I'm looking at the Bible, how they said Moses took them so many years to cross whatever, and it could have been just a month if you really looked at it.
Right. But they were lost.
And a lot of people died during that time. Right. So.
And wasn't that a punish? I'm a little shy.
I don't want to.
Story.
Yeah, I don't know the story. I'm just going along with what I've heard in the Bible.
Well, I think that the threat of like without people having a different understanding, they're going to keep following the mainstream. Yes. And so, and like part of what we're putting out is that mainstream understanding doesn't serve us. That doesn't lead to us building enough power to topple the systems that we want to topple or restructure. So we want to have a different understanding that is more open to meeting everyone where they're at. And I also say that Roger and everyone else always has a choice. Like you have your entire life, you've made the choice to keep following the mainstream and status quo, and you can make a choice to follow something different. And I think this next activity might like get us a little bit out of our heads and more in our bodies about what the system really feels like.
Excuse me, Nigel.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I heard Roger say, does the old have to die off? And you mentioned the word I was thinking of. The old doesn't need to die off, yet the old is invited to open up, to consider that there is a different truth from what we may be conditioned to believe that may actually hold the key to us progressing to where we want to go for all humans.
Right. Yes, I appreciate you saying that. I love that is in the space now too, because that feeling of choice, I think, is really empowering for people. You always have a choice, and what this content is trying to do is give you more choices, really, for how you want to express and be in relationship to people. I don't have time to go through all of these definitions, but y'all will have them in the PowerPoint that I send out. There's a ton of definitions that a lot of trainers have put some great work into describing a bunch of different terms you might have heard or you might have read around gender and sexual identity. But the foundation we've gone through, the foundation is gender roles are different from sex. Sex is biological, and gender roles are socialized and we're trained into groups. So this is a word I do want to spend some, I do want to name this word here. Cis heteropatriarchy is a fancier word, or more, not fancy, a more comprehensive word to capture what we mean by sexism. Sexism is kind of shorthand. But cis heteropatriarchy gives us all the vocabulary. I wish I had time to dig into each part of this really long word, but the slides before it, I think, do a good job of explaining. But I do want to name that sexism is a shorthand for the real way you make like sexism structural is cis heteropatriarchy. Okay, so it's basically the powers that be have created a binary system where if you are born a man, then you are conditioned into maleness, and that's a box that you have to fit in. And then the only other box that this system puts in front of us is woman and femininity. If you are born a woman, then you are conditioned to the female gender role. And there's a lot of rules about these boxes, that if you're in one box, you have to be attracted to one person from the other box, and vice versa, and that's it. Like, the binary system is not real. It is real that people get born with different biological pieces and parts. That is true for the most part. Like, some people can be born with both, and some people can be born with neither, or some combination. But for the most majority, people are born with one, either man or female, man or woman, biological parts. Like, that's real. That's a real thing. And those traits, those roles that we get organized into, those groupings, those are not real. And that's what sets up the binary. So when we say that people have a choice, that's kind of what we're getting at, is to X out the binary and just live your life as a human being. Like, that's what we are at the end of the day. So the gender binary system is not real. So I'm gonna do an abbreviated version of this activity. Who here has heard the phrase, take it like a man or act like a lady? Who has heard those phrases? I know I have. And we're gonna do an activity that kind of elevates what we mean by gender roles are trained by society. We're not gonna do a pair share, but I do want you to think about a story of a time that you were pressured to take it like a man or act like a lady. And as you're thinking about that story, I have a couple. I'll figure out one to share. But this connects back to the red circle in the pictogram. We talked about the culture is the circle that encompasses the institutions and sits on top of the history. Part of that culture is this binary of roles. So the story for me on Take It Like a Man is all around like football. Like, I grew up in South Georgia, and like football was a big deal. And I remember, like, I was like 6 years old, 6 or 7, and my dad just walked into the kitchen during dinner. Is like, Nigel, you're going to football practice in a couple of days. You need to get ready. And like, up to that point, I had never showed any interest in playing football. I don't even think I was watching football on TV at that point. But there was this expectation from my dad that, one, I would be interested in football, two, that I would take to it or would be good at it. And there was this expectation that it was something that I would get something out of. And like, anyone who's played football or watched football knows this is really like high contact, in some ways a super violent sport. And there's a lot of like physical pain and discomfort involved in it. And I'm not passing a judgment about whether or not that's good or bad, though. The rate of concussions of people in the NFL would tell us that that's not a good thing. But like, that's an example of take it like a man. I was expected to, and I went to practice. And somehow at practice, like my first day of practice, I ended up being on the offensive line, playing center. Like the super high contact area for someone to be their first time playing. I still don't understand how that is where I ended up. But that was an example of take it like a man, because there was no space. Like, no one asked me if that's what I wanted. No one asked me after practice if I had a good time or did I enjoy it or did I even want to go back. It was just this expectation that I was gonna go and that football was for me. And like, y'all see how there was no like consent, or there really wasn't a lot of choice for me in the matter. Like, that's what we mean by like these roles are organized onto us, like we are put into them. Another way to put it is, I felt like I remember feeling like I could not say no to my dad saying that I had to go to practice, even though he didn't ask. Like when there's no choice for you, then like that's not really a really healthy relationship with it. That's an example of take it like a man. Does anyone want to come off mute and talk about a story of a time they were pressured to take it like a man or act like a lady?
I can only use the term of, I've heard the term bite the bullet.
Where did you remember how you learned that lesson or why that was important to you?
I heard it on the police department a lot. Bite the bullet. That means go along with what's going on.
And let's think about why that was important for a police department.
That was important with the members of the police department to stay in line. You just going to bite the bullet.
And why was it important to the police department that people stay in line?
It was sort of like a fraternity.
Because like police are in a particular position in society, especially these days. And the police as an institution rely on people within it to all be aligned and have each other's back. Like we all, that's part
Isn't that just like a fraternity? That's just like a fraternity in college, ain't it? Okay.
And then like what I'm getting at is that served a purpose. Like to get people to be loyal to each other serves the purpose of making sure that the police as an institution can survive across history. And so that's a really good example of how and I'm gonna get to what came up in chat. That's a good example of the relationship between narratives and what people understand relates to action, right? And then what people don't, these narratives and these roles that we play don't just exist because they exist. They exist in service of something. And when you unpack what that something is, it should give you a little bit more clarity. And then Clark's point in the chat about control is absolutely right. There are a lot, like police are in a lot of, let's call them like sensitive situations out in the community. It's unpredictable turf. It's not like working at the post office, for example, where like the biggest threat might be a dog or like a spider in the mailbox. Like it's a different type of turf. And so when things happen out on the job, it's in the police department's interest to control what's happening because it's sensitive, right? And so like that Clark's point is real, like that it serves a purpose also, and that controlling is also real. I wonder if anyone else have a story for when they learned or were taught to take it like a man or act like a lady.
I know in church they would always say, sit up, act like a lady, don't whistle, don't keep your legs closed when you sit down. It was always something that you had to do in order for you to be a lady.
Right, and let's
like a lady.
And let's keep that thread going. What did the people who didn't fall in line, what did they get called?
Outcast. Oh, don't act like them. Those were the women that they didn't want you to be around. They didn't want you to be around a person that didn't do that. You, when I grew up, I'm a little older, so we used to have to wear white gloves. You wear a hat to church. Women, you kind of look down. You were supposed to look down on these people.
So that's a punishment.
Yeah.
So anyone whose behavior is outside of those two boxes, those binary boxes, any behavior outside of those boxes gets punished. the behavior within those boxes is celebrated. That's why, as Roger put it, people are gonna keep marching unless there's some intervention that happens. Yeah.
But that's
Someone,
a way of control. Really, you're being controlled.
right, and
I, you know, it was always a way of controlling you. I did some boxing training. My husband taught me how. I mean, never play out, but I always wanted to be on the other end. You know, I don't want you to put me in that box. And it's always felt like act like a lady was like, you got to do exactly as the ladies do. You know?
yes.
And it's just control. It's like you have to be in control at all times. And I never liked it, but you know.
Nigel, I wanted to mention that after, I mean, you said, how are you treated when you're outside of those lines of condition or what have you? And generally you're ostracized, isolated, you're dehumanized. And it's really sad when I consider how young children, how people can model for children to be mean to other children because they are not within those lines that all are being conditioned to accept as valued. So if you have a appearing, I have to use the word appearing male child who has behaviors of what has been conditioned as female,
yes,
they can destroy those children. In my opinion, ending up with such emotional instability that they feel worthless and want to commit suicide. And that conditioning is not worth that. So that's why when I think about our need to open our minds, it's life-saving. Get over yourself and save someone's life by opening your mind to the fact that these small lanes are not enough for what we need to do for this world.
That's right. And like I hope like people are feeling like a spiritual connection to what was just said about how small the lanes are compared to how broad human experience deserves to be. Like humans are like they're brilliant and complex, and there's like few things from that perspective that lend themselves to being like strict or stuck. I think someone else was hopping off mute. Yep.
Both of those sayings, take it like a man. And, those was mostly geared to our children. Take it like a man was telling me like, man up, boy. Take it like a man. Don't be a sissy. Quit whining. If I punch you in the chest, take it, stand up like a man. You know. That was the thing in my family. If I wasn't bold enough or strong enough as the average boy, then I might hear my father or my uncle say, "Take it like a man, boy. Quit that whining. And so what? You face down, get back up, you know, and try it again."
I love the point about things we're taught as children and as young people, and that's super real. Like the things we're taught between as in those development stages from like 5 to like 9, those stick with us. And then right after around 9 or 10, you start to hit puberty, which is a whole transformational time where it's happening pretty quickly, really. And so like the reason why we get taught that stuff so early is so that we repeat it as we grow. Like it hurts, and I hope people are feeling the weight to like those messages and things that we were taught back then. They have a way of showing up sometimes in ways that hold us back from being liberated and joyful people. And like anything that is holding a human back from being liberated and joyful is not natural. Like it's part of the system that's been built up. Yeah. So you could do this activity again, the same pictogram. We did it before for racism, your racial group. You could do it again for your gender group. What is for my gender group of males? Like I could go through the history of maleness, of being male, is a part like being the warriors and hunters, the people who are putting their physical bodies at risk, but then not taking responsibility for the like emotional and spiritual well-being. Like that's part of the history. And that's part of like the person who came my phone, I missed your name, but you were talking about how if you got hit, like you weren't supposed to show emotion, you were supposed to put your chest up and hit back even. Do y'all see the connection between that type of narrative and the fact that it is men and boys who were drafted for wars? Like it's this expectation that men and boys' bodies are disposable and such that it is a given that you will get drafted into a war. So like I remember when I went to college, I had to register for the draft, and that was like a thing for me. That's like, I rarely have to do something like that. That's so risky, and no one is talking to me about it. Like, why is it just a given that if we went to war, it's a good chance that I would have to go fight? Like, there's a relationship between that being a real policy and the cultural norms that surround how we talk about males and men. And the same thing is true for the other side of the spectrum. People who are conditioned into the female gender role, it's all about like not being controversial. It's about being attractive to men. So that's how the structure of sexism is set up to benefit cis men, like people who are identified as men and male. That's part of how it's set up, is what we care about is always higher than the other side of the spectrum. And that's not a natural thing. Like that's not in our DNA. That's not a part of the natural world. What's most natural is most people have a masculine side and a feminine side within them. Like all people have both within them. And we get conditioned into choosing one, and that's really messed up. There are qualities of feminization that are really important, like caring for, there are qualities that are really important to leadership, I'll say. Like if our country, like it's not an accident that like the country is like 2/3 women, I think, or like half women, but people who are elected to federal office are like 98% men. Like that's not an accident. And when you look at how our government bodies can be so cold-hearted and compartmentalized and like forget about the people who actually elected them, like that's part of that gender role of maleness too. It's all connected here, right? It's all connected here. Every single person is fit into one of those lanes, including the people who are in power too. But like, what was the point? Like, what was the point of all that? Of how the systems then relate to each other is, sorry for the crude drawing here. We haven't got this graphic drawn up professionally yet, but this is 3 circles that all intersect. The blue circle is capitalism, the green circle is sexism, and the orange circle is racism. And they all are deeply intertwined. It's not like racial capitalism is off in a corner and then sexism is in a different corner. They all interrelate. And so to add the lens to a lot of, like there's this thread around history, and I'm gonna use this example because like I just know this history more well. There's a thread across history of Black men being punished for showing affection towards white women. Like the Emmett Till story, for example. Like that young kid was drugged from a horse and carriage and hung and burnt and thrown into a river for allegedly whistling at a white woman. And come to find out that white woman confessed later that was false, that didn't actually happen. There's a relationship between the norms that creates and the fact that the women's point in society was on a pedestal there. Those relate to each other. And that's an example of how the circles all relate. Like you couldn't, like part of the policing for Black men around this country has gone around that dynamic. And that's not just about race, and that's not just about class. It's also about sexism too. Those all relate. And so this is what we mean when we say that the root cause for all of our issues are racism, capitalism, and sexism together. There's no way to separate the circles. So that creates that's the end of the presentation of just content. That's the end for me. In this last bit, there's a couple ways we could go. We could kind of have a discussion now about how you apply some of these lessons to your work. Or we could have a discussion about like follow-up trainings you would want, or like outstanding questions you still have that you want to hear more about. Which way people do Mary or Allison feel strongly as the conveners, or do people on the call want to chime in with questions?
I think Mary had put something in the chat earlier about how the systems that perpetuate inequality make it so hard to win on our issues. And I wonder if we can just broadly talk about that. And anybody else has questions that are pressing.
Yeah. But one top line, one reaction I have to reading that phrase is how the systems are benefiting like some people, and the people who it's hurting are all, what's the word? Like separated. Like all of the people who are hurting from, let's just look at the example of, what if we just looked at capitalism and class by itself? All of the people who are being negatively impacted by class and the economy, definitely, if they were all together, would have enough power to take out the people who are benefiting from it. But we're all separated, and we're separated along lines of race and along lines of gender to a degree. But when you look at class, it really is a lot about race, and that's not, like, separated is like almost a light way to put it. Like there are like policies that have been written in, like segregation, like redlining, for example, that have made it so that people aren't actually together or in a way to be pointed towards the target. That if you look at who's benefiting from the system, the target gets super clear. But because of that separation, it makes it hard to win on these issues, because it's been like generations of separation. And like humans are creatures of habit, like we're like that which gets reinforced gets like reinformed. And so it makes it real hard to win when the people who could be together for an issue are separated by structures. And I think that means there's opportunity too. It means that, like, I'm hoping that the more people who we can give this analysis of, the more we have in common. We have more in common than we have different. It'll be easier for people to actually join with us.
How do you change all these old taboos that people have?
Yeah, there's on an individual level, it's like meeting an emotional problem with an emotional solution. Like, we have to be willing to be vulnerable with people about the like emotional cost to what's going on. Another way to put it is, we can't just you can't just talk about all the stats and numbers about the wealth gap, about how Black wealth has decreased and white wealth has increased. You can't just, like, even now, those like facts and words aren't getting a reaction to y'all. But if I sat down and told a story about like the emotional cost of the lack of generational wealth, if I told a story about how me and my wife had to postpone our wedding because we had to save up more money and pay for it ourselves because neither one of our parents come from generational wealth, like, that has a different impact on it. So if we're talking to someone who we think is totally against us or might be totally against us, we want to engage with them on emotional and storytelling tones before like the stats tone. And that's hard work, and it's slow work too. Like it's like that one-on-one like type of interaction takes time. It takes resources of like people and time. I think there's opportunity there again to invite more people into this fight with us.
So how do you it's like to me, it's like a tug of war. You know, we got two sides and we trying to pull about this COVID-19. I mean, it always get in it some kind of way to take away the seriousness of our issues. I mean, how do you identify that?
I don't know if I'm tracking you. Are you saying people are using COVID-19 as a distraction from?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. How do you, I mean, you know, how do you do that? That's a big boy.
What do you
I don't know.
Wait a minute. What do you mean? Can you elaborate a little more on that, Roger?
I'm trying to say, for example, and I talked to somebody with us, I had a problem with my electric in my building, and the prices was too high, I thought. So I called the utility company to come read my meter. Well, they said we can't come in because of the COVID. I told them nobody lives in the building. They still stayed on because of the COVID. We can't come in the building. The building is vacant. So how you using that as an excuse to read the meters? We can read the meters out above, you know, in our office or whatever, but they would not come into the building because of the COVID. Nobody's in the building.
Okay,
I
so
feel like using that.
and so you
So
say
now,
they use.
wait a minute, but now they come in your house, okay, because they got a mask on.
It feels like it's different. It's different days. It's like the day that's the company who wouldn't come is a different day than the people who come in with the mask. But I think like part of what's going on is like our government has not been set up to do the type of massive like education to people to get everyone on the same page about what the risk around COVID look like. Like most people get their information from the news. And
I think it's the 1%ers that's controlling that. And if they say we can't come in, they don't come in. That's how I see it.
I'm still not tracking. I still feel it's different weeds, but I want to like create space for other like questions that people have. As we've got like 4 minutes left. A light bulb that went off, or
So I just
a question you have for future.
Flag that Clark was having his hand raised for a bit. I don't know if that was his question.
Yeah, I got a quick comment. You said earlier that there are a large group in this country that if they banded together could make a change.
Yep.
And I think we were saying something about the 99%. Well, I'm going to revise that number down to say maybe 96%, because there's that group in the middle that are doing pretty good. And I'm going to equate them to the straw boss on the plantation. Okay. So there's a larger group at the lower end that really is not doing well. And as you said, they are being told or separated from each other by many means. One of those means is capitalism. They say if the government provides health care to you, that's socialism like Russia, and you don't want to be like Russia. Okay? If you wear a mask, that means it's impinging on your freedoms as an American. So I don't want to wear a mask because I'm a free American. There are so many little subtle things that are thrown out here that people fall for, and that's what's keeping us from getting the message out of how to unite. And that's been something we've talked about in CUFA, How can we unite people to the truth?
It's like that's a huge project, and it's, I think, part of the, like when you say that 96% is real, and if I had to guess about what percentage of people do we need to be like totally like our core leaders, or like totally with us or with our orgs, of that 96%, you probably need like 15% max. That's not even half or a quarter. Like we don't need everyone with us, actually. Not everyone is gonna be on the front lines. And so part of what we all gotta have some discipline around being okay with some people aren't with us yet. Let me find the people who are and leverage them to build out. Because there's so many people out there who could be with us. Well, it looks like we got like 60 seconds left, and not hearing any questions. I wanna appreciate the invitation from Mary for me to come, and I consider this a part one. Like we really, each part of that training could have been 2 hours by itself. So there's definitely, and most of that time would be people kind of more talking more about the impact it's had on them. So there's a way that I can come back, or maybe come back with the team and do a version of that. I think that I think it's also interesting to think about what's the strategy we want to build from this analysis. Like, given what we know about root causes, okay, how do our campaigns need to shift? Or do our communications need to shift? Or what's the base building strategy? And if we're on the same accord with this analysis, then we can maybe march towards that. And I think, and I would love to like be in closer coordination with Benny Shibashi, also on our national staff as the field lead, to figure out what the next steps look like. So I appreciate y'all taking some time out of your Monday evenings. This won't be the last time I hear from y'all, and thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Really
You're
appreciate it.
very welcome. I'll catch y'all later.
Thank you.